Hello friends, in this video we are going to print this pattern. The prerequisite for solving this problem is the concept of nested loops. I have given a link in the description of this video from which you can understand in detail how nested loops work. So if you are not aware about nested loops, I would recommend you to navigate to the given link and watch that video at first, and then you can come back to this video and you will be able to understand everything. So whenever this type of patterns are given, the first thing you have to do is you have to find the relation between the number of rows, columns and the elements printed in the columns. As we all know that counting in programming always starts from 0. So in this pattern you can see in row number 0 we have 1 column, in row number 1 we have 2 columns, in row number 2 we have 3 columns, in row number 3 we have 4 columns, and so on. So if we denote the number of row by I, what is the number of columns in ith row? The number of columns in ith row is I plus 1. So for row number 0 we have 0 plus 1, that is 1 column. For row number 1 we have 1 plus 1, that is 2 columns. For row number 2 we have 2 plus 1, that is 3 columns, and so on. So let's start our code. So first of all, what we have to do? First of all, let's comment out all this above things, because these are just for the sake of your understanding. So we will comment out all this and let's start our code. So first of all, we will ask the user for the number of rows that you want to print. So here we have total 5 rows. Now it's completely up to the user how many rows he wants to print. So let's ask that from the user at first. Rows equal to int input how many rows. Fine. So we will take the input from the user and will convert it to an integer and will store it in a variable called rows. Now in the outer loop we'll denote the number of row by I, and what will be the total number of rows? The total number of rows is denoted by the variable rows, right? And what is the total number of columns in the ith row? Number of columns in ith row is I plus 1, right? So we'll denote the number of column, that is in which column we are, we will denote that by j. So for j in range I plus 1, right, we will print what we have to print. We have to print it like this. First we have to print 1, then 2, then 3, and so on. So after printing every element we have to increment it by 1. So let's take a variable called element and initialize it with the value 1, and after printing element we will increment it by 1 each time. Fine. So element equal to element plus 1, right? And here what we have to do, what is the default value of the end parameter in the print function? As I just mentioned in my previous video, the default value of the end parameter is new line. So by default, after printing every element, this print function will print a new line, which we don't want, right? We don't want to print 2 and 3 in 2 separate lines. We want them to be printed in the same line. Rather, we want a blank space to be printed after every element. So every pair of elements should have a blank space between them. So what we have to do for that? We have to simply replace the end parameter of the print function by, you can see the default value of the end parameter is /n, that is a new line. So we have to replace this default value by a blank space. Fine. And again, after coming out of the inner loop, that is after printing all the elements of one complete row, to move to the next line we have to print a new line. And you can do that simply by calling the print function. As the default value of the int parameter of the print function is a new line, so if you don't specify anything inside the print function, it will print a new line for you. Fine. So let's run our code. It prompts us to enter the number of rows. Let the number of rows be 5, and you can see we get the desired output. Now let's start debugging our code line by line. We can start the debugging session by pressing Ctrl plus F5. If we press Ctrl plus F10 now, it prompts us to enter the number of rows. For saving time, let's reduce the number of rows. Let the number of rows be 3. We move to the next line, and you can see a variable called rows getting created with the value 3. Now we again move to the next line. You can see another new variable element getting created with an initial value of 1. So we will enter the outer loop, which indicates the rows. So if we press Ctrl plus F10, we enter the outer loop. The current value of I is 0, which means we are currently inside the 0th row. Now we enter the inner loop. The current value of j is also 0, which means we are in the 0th column of the 0th row, which is this. So here what we will print? We'll print element. And what is the value of element? The value of current value of element is 1. That we will print here. You can see the element 1 is getting printed in the 0th column of the 0th row. And you can see a blank space has also been printed. If you highlight this, you can see after 1 there is a blank space. Okay, so as the end parameter of the print function has been changed to blank space, so after printing 1, it prints a blank space. So now we increment the value of element by 1. So from 1, the value of element changes to 2. We'll now enter the second iteration of the inner loop, that is inside 0th row, we will enter column number 1, but you could clearly see from line number 12, it directly came to line number 15. Why did it happen? Now tell me one thing, what is the current value of I? The current value of I is 0. So this range function, that is range I plus 1, will give me range 1. And what does the sequence range 1 contain? The range 1 contains only one element in the sequence, and that is 0. So there will be only one iteration in the inner loop, which we have already completed. That's why it did not enter the inner loop anymore. Rather, from line number 12, it came to line number 15. Fine. So after coming to line number 15, it will print a new line through this print statement. If we execute this line, you can see the cursor has moved to the next line, which means a new line has been printed. Now we will enter row number 1. Our row number execution of row number 0 has been completed. Now we will enter row number 1. We have entered row number 1, and you can see the value of I has changed from 0 to 1. Now we will again enter the inner loop, that is column number 0 of row number 1. Let's press Ctrl plus F10, and you can see the value of j 0. That means we are currently in column number 0 of row number 1. Again it will print the current value of element. That is, what is the current value of element? That is 2. So it will print that in the console, and you can see 2 getting printed, and along with 2 a blank space is also getting printed. It again increments the value of element. So the current value of element is 3. Now it will enter the second iteration of the inner loop. So let's press Ctrl plus F10, and you can see the value of j has changed to 1. So we have entered column number 1 of row number 1. Now it will again execute the print statement. What is the current value of the element? Current value of element is 3, so that will get printed. Let's execute this line, and you can see 3 getting printed. Now if we again press Ctrl plus F10, it goes to line number 12, but we have exhausted all the iterations of the inner loop for I equal to 1. For I equal to 1, the range function will have range 1 plus 1, that is 2. So we had 2 iterations of the inner loop which we have already completed. Now it will go from line number 12 to directly line number 15. So we again press Ctrl plus F10 and it has gone to line number 15. It will again print a new line, and you can see the cursor moves to the next line, and again it will enter the next iteration of the outer loop. So you can see the value of I equal to 2. You will again enter the inner loop. So value of j has changed to 0. So we are in the 0th column of row number 2. So it will again print the current value of element, increment element by 1. To the next iteration of inner loop, it will print 5, increment element by 1, and this is the last iteration of the inner loop, and it prints 6. So we have again exhausted all the iterations of the inner loop for I equal to 2. So it will again directly come from line number 12 to line number 15, and it will again print a new line, go to line number 11. Now we have exhausted all the iterations of the outer loop as well. As the value of rows was 3, so there were 3 iterations in the outer loop which we have already completed. So if we again press Ctrl plus F10, our code execution ends here. If we again press Ctrl plus F10, our debugging session ends. So that's how you can print this pattern. Now if we again run the cell and change the number of rows, obviously it will print the pattern according to the number of rows that you have entered. Fine. So friends, that's it for this video. If you have liked my video, please subscribe to my channel and please hit the bell icon so that you get notified when I'll upload more Python and data science related videos. And please don't forget to like and share my video so that it reaches a larger audience and they also get benefited from it. Thanks a lot for watching.